Hello, I'm Shane Healy and I'm the Media and Communications Director for the Archdiocese of Melbourne. Today working with SHALOM WORLD and delighted to talk to the Archbishop of Melbourne, Denis Hart.
Remember, Jesus Christ is real. Love him and love others. Follow him, even if it is challenging, and know that you will always have hope and never give up. And I think that's the fundamental thing to Catholic faith.
And welcome, Your Grace.
Thank you very much, Shane. It's lovely to be with you and with all our audience.
Well, it's a lovely honour to be talking to Archbishop Denis Hart. And let's start with your childhood. Tell us a little bit about growing up.
I was born in Hawthorn during the war. I'm the eldest of three children. Both my brother and my sister are dead. My brother was a civil engineer and he had 5 children, so I have lovely nephews and nieces, but he died at the age of 59. My sister Anne suffered from Down syndrome and polio, so as you can imagine, the first 13 years until she died when I was 18 were fairly challenging for Mum. Dad was an accountant, working first with the railways, and then he became the National Secretary of the Knights of the Southern Cross, and he sought to do what he could do for people and for men at a time when it was not always easy for Catholic men to get jobs, but he was known as a focus of someone who would work hard and help them as they helped each other. My mother had been a primary school teacher, and this never left her. Mother would never give up. If I didn't quite get it right, she'd get it organised. I remember one time at school in about grade 4, I didn't ever get anything up on the back of the classroom for art. So this time Mum was determined that we'd draw an orange, and all I was allowed to do was to colour it in, and it got up on the back of the classroom for art. So Mum was a good teacher. Anne, my sister, made great demands with her poor health. Martin, my brother, was good at sport and good at mathematics and later became an engineer. I went to St John's in Hawthorn where we had big classes. I remember in grade 3 and 4 there were 90 of us there, taught by a young Marist brother. I enjoyed those years. I did well at school. I enjoyed maths and English. I was good at English. But right from the start we were involved in our parish of Immaculate Conception in Hawthorn, which was run by the Jesuits. Father Bill O'Collins was the brother of the Bishop of Geraldton, and Father O'Collins had been a diocesan priest in Melbourne before he became parish priest of Hawthorn. And from the age of 7 I became an altar server, and this was one of the formative aspects of my life. I think seeing the priests in the parish and seeing what they did, coming to know and love the Mass, particularly as I learnt more and more Latin through secondary college, I realised that the liturgy was a great school of knowing and loving and learning about God. So our family was a faith-filled family. Mum and Dad were members of the Women's and Men's Sodality. When Father Peyton came to Melbourne in 1952, we all started the family rosary, and my dad helped organise the big rally at the Melbourne Cricket Ground where 100,000 people met and prayed the rosary together. And I think that sort of influenced me a lot, because I could see that prayer was an engagement with God, but it was also something which was very much part of me in a human way. And that's, I think, the thing that Our Lady teaches us. In the rosary, she takes us by the hand and teach us spiritually and emotionally to think about the things that were in Jesus' life and to make them real.
But just tracking back, you've obviously had an upbringing that brought you close to God through your family. Is there a moment you can remember in your upbringing that sort of zings with you, where you suddenly felt Jesus in your life, or was it just a growing thing?
I think it was a growing thing. In normal Catholic life, God doesn't send angels with shining lights from heaven. And through my time as an altar server, and after I went to the Jesuits at Xavier College, that sense of closeness to God, that sense of reaching out from where we are on earth to the great God who understands us, was shown in my serving at the Mass, and also on Sunday afternoons in adoration and benediction. I was often asked to go back for a second time on a Sunday, and I think that helped me to talk to Jesus in prayer in a very realistic way. So to me, Jesus was and is now a real person, a person who was human like us, and we saw the things in his life through the scriptures, through the lives of Christ that we read, but we saw also that Jesus whom we knew and we know is God. And that means we reach out of ourselves, we reach out of the way we see things here, and we come to know that God is with us as people. And I think that's the fundamental thing to Catholic faith, a personal relationship with Jesus who is human and divine. And there's another dimension to that, and that's the role of Mary, our mother, because our faith is something to which we give religious assent of mind and will. It's something that we accept intellectually as compelling and true because it's the teaching of Jesus and because he entrusted the church to go on teaching to the end of time all that he taught. But linked to that is something which is essentially part of our humanity, and that is the love of Mary, our mother, just as our human mother loved us and cared for us. And my parents were not emotional people, excitable, but their faith was firm, their love was strong. We knew we were loved, even though they weren't telling us about it all the week. And Mary, Jesus' mother, helped me to understand that loving Jesus was something that embraced the whole of me. Later on, of course, I was a parish priest, and I went to Medjugorje. Certainly impressed by the nearness of Our Lady, but what really impressed me was the sacramental life. People going to Mass and to confession, praying the Rosary, linking with God in a normal human way. And that's the big thing. It wasn't the exceptional signs or promises of this or that or extraordinary things, but it was the things that I knew as a human being, as a boy, as a priest. And when the time came for me to be thinking about a vocation, I thought, I wonder whether I can do this. You know, will I? The seminary's a long time. Have I got what it takes? And yet the prayer time in the seminary, the time to study and reflect, that all helped me to see in a realistic way that I was ready if God wanted me. And that was always my attitude. That's always been my attitude in the church, to do whatever God wanted of me. How surprising.
It's a great answer. You talked about the human nature of your relationship with Jesus. Now, I've got a lovely wife, Bernadette, and from time to time we have a bit of a row. Have you ever got any times where you look back and you've been disappointed in Jesus, or like a little human row, as it were?
No, I think the great thing, the great gift that I had with a lot of other people was that Jesus is God, and the church which he founded is divine in its origin, divine in its continuance, but it embraces fallible human beings. Some of the evils, some of the scandals and things like that have never dented my love of the church or my love of Jesus. They've certainly made me say, hey, this isn't the way things should be. They've made me be shocked by what some people in the church have done, but they've never shaken my doubt in the church because of that very firm love that Jesus showed me, the love one another as I have loved you, being there for God and for others, which has sort of carried me along however imperfectly I've responded.
What are your favourite religious or spiritual books or films? What comes immediately flooding into your mind?
I certainly think, I think, you know, we were all brought up on the scriptures, on the life of Christ, and there have been films about the life of Christ. In a more contemplative way, some of the spiritual writers, Dom Columba Marmion, or in a more popular way, Thomas Merton. Later on to the writings of Pope John Paul II, his letter on the splendour of truth, his letter about suffering and mercy. I met John Paul II in 1986, and I went round Australia with him for the papal visit. I was helping the then Monsignor John McGee organise all the ceremonies. And what impressed me about John Paul II was his ability to pray and be constantly in touch with God. But then when he was talking to someone like we are talking now, he was able to give them his whole attention, and that attention was magnetic. And I think his magnetic faith, his prayerfulness, later on when I went to the Synod of Bishops in 1998, he'd be sitting there in the chair, he'd have a rosary in his hand, he'd have a book, and he'd have a text of what someone was saying. So in other words, the ability to multi-focus was something that he had. But it was a magnetic personality. When I saw him after he went back to Rome, and the next time he said, "Oh, Australia is a long journey." And he remembered the distances we travelled in Australia, but being with the Pope in those great liturgies helped me to realise that this is the successor of St. Peter. This is the vicar of Christ. This is the one in whom God speaks to me in my day. And I mean, I loved and admired all the others. Pius XII was a holy, remote figure. John the 23rd came as a warm, rotund, chubby man who had a great humanity about him. Paul VI, trying carefully to put into the right focus all the movement and things that had happened at the Second Vatican Council. Most of it magnificent, and it brought the liturgy, the school of God's service into English. It brought us to think more about our role in the community of the church. It brought us to examine more carefully the truth that we have, but it also coincided with the sexual revolution in the late 1960s, and a whole lot of things went out the window and went wrong. And Paul VI had, from 1963 to 1978, had the unenviable job of keeping the church on its right focus while accommodating what people were looking for in the world. And then, of course, that focus became stronger with Pope John Paul II, and then with Pope Benedict. And Benedict was always, in my years, those years I would have gone to Rome for meetings once or twice a year, whether for the Liturgical Commission, of which I was a consultor, whether for the International Commission for Translations. And whenever you'd walk across St. Peter's Square, if the then Cardinal Ratzinger were coming, he'd move very simply and just say hello to you. And then meeting him as Pope, he always had something to say, very humbly. That humble servant idea that he used right at the end of his reign was something very, very special. And then, of course, we came to Pope Francis. Pope Francis is a Jesuit. He has a lot more throwaway lines. Some of them can be, like other Jesuits I know, disconcerting, sometimes challenging, but his outreach to the poor and to the simplicity and his own simplicity of life has reflected what I've known of the Jesuits living the life close to Christ in my youth, in my time as a seminarian.
A quick overview of when you first became a priest and then when you first became bishop and archbishop. Those moments, were they just a simple phone call? How did they work?
I became a priest in 1967, and I went back to the seminary for the last 4 or 5 months. And then I was appointed to the repatriation hospital at Heidelberg for 6 weeks before going to North Balwyn. And I thought I'd be in North Balwyn for 3 years. And I got to know the people, and Father Kevin Broderick was a remarkable pastor who knew the people, who loved them, and who worked hard for them. And he taught me to visit, to know people, to respect them. But 1 year later, I was brought into the cathedral to be Master of Ceremonies with Cardinal Knox. And I spent 6 years in the cathedral. We organised the Eucharistic Congress in 1973. But the work that I really appreciated was the work in the hospitals, with the altar service of the cathedral, helping the Archbishop prepare his liturgies and special occasions. And I remember when Archbishop Knox went to Rome, Archbishop Little became the Archbishop, and his installation, he had a simpler, open style, but he didn't have the experience of Rome and of the church that Cardinal Knox had in his 5 years, where he'd done a tremendous amount. Archbishop Little was seeking to unfold the council. He was a very sensitive man, a man who felt a lot of how people received things, and they were difficult and challenging times. And I remained Master of Ceremonies for all those years. I worked on our marriage tribunal, and that was a wonderful opportunity to meet with people who had suffered, and I was able to do a lot by sending non-baptism cases to Rome to help people to regularise their situation.
Right.
So the work of the tribunal was tremendously pastoral and involved with people who really wanted their faith but had had great suffering in their lives. Then in 1986, we had the visit of Pope John Paul II, and I spent a year preparing for that. After that, I went to West Brunswick. Italians saying Mass in Italian every Sunday, the Filipinos, the Australians, running a parish with new and old, young people, the school. I really enjoyed it for 10 years. I didn't want to leave. And then Archbishop Pell became the Archbishop and wanted me to be Vicar General. And twice I said to him, well, I'm very happy where I am, thank you very much. But he wouldn't take no for an answer. And I became Vicar General, which meant that I had the day-to-day running of the diocese. But I tried to bring that care of priests and people that I'd learnt from other priests into what I was doing.
Yes.
A year later, because Archbishop Pell had been an auxiliary bishop, I was made an auxiliary bishop and remained Vicar General until 2001, when Archbishop Pell was moved to Sydney. And that happened on the 10th of May, and on the 22nd of June, I was appointed Archbishop. It was a surprise in one way, but it was the continuity of what I'd learnt to do. I'm sure my style was different from Archbishop Pell. I came from Melbourne, I knew the priests, I tried to reach out to them and to carry on the work of the council, to carry on the work of liturgy, of teaching, of visitation and caring for people. One thing that has always touched me has been the great faith and love of the Melbourne people. They love the church, the great work of education, the expansion of education, the work that I was then involved in the translation of the Mass into English through the International Commission on English in the Liturgy for 13 years, the work that I was involved first as a consultor and now as a member of the Pope's Congregation for Worship, and then more recently in the Pontifical Council for Culture and in the Congregation for Eastern Churches. All of these gave me an experience of the church which was big and vibrant in Melbourne, the migrant communities, the people that really sought to share their faith. I went to visit Slovakia and the Czech Republic and Italy and Slovenia and Germany and England. I formed friends with other English-speaking bishops, and I achieved, I think, a broader vision of what the church was about, led by the dynamism of John Paul II and Pope Benedict and now Pope Francis. And all of that time, I've humbly tried to do what best I can. For me, the teaching of Jesus Christ and the church is paramount. What the church teaches is not just something up for grabs, not just something of what people might think. It is, our religion is a revealed religion. And Jesus taught us about the value of life from its first beginning to natural death. And therefore the debates in society where people are trying to say what they think, or even to tell in an agonizing way what they went through, confronted with a dying relative, sometimes has shaken people's faith. It's never shaken my faith, because I believe that there is objective truth, and that's what John Paul II was on about in The Splendour of Truth, his encyclical letter, to remind us that there is objective truth, that the church is entrusted with teaching that truth, offering, as Pope Paul VI said, proposing it, not imposing it, but reminding us of the value of that truth. And that, I think, is what a lot of people in this individualistic modern age have forgotten about. They've forgotten it's all just as I think it. If I get a warm feeling about something, that's what I do. However, real truth and real happiness go beyond myself to what Jesus gave us as the journey for eternal life, the truth which will keep us free and which will carry us to the end of our days and to be with God in heaven. That's what the church is here for, to offer what Jesus brought, to offer the redemption, the hope, the new world, the new life, even in the confused world of now and today.
Well, talking about the confused world, you've been described by many as a bold bishop, and you've had to handle a number of rather large secular issues that have been floating around in the last 10 or 20 years. You touched on euthanasia a moment ago. There's been quite a few issues. How have you felt you've handled those? Because some of them have been, fairly challenging.
Fortunately, and this is no gift of mine, God has given me a deep faith in Jesus, a wonderful faith in the divine origin and nature of the church, a wonderful intellectual acceptance. I remember as a teenage schoolboy learning the 5 ways by which the existence of God could be proven from reason, from St. Thomas. And that helped me to realize that the link between faith and reason cannot be broken. The two things go together, and the teaching of the church is a rock, is a light in the darkness, something like a magnet to draw people to it. But it's up to us as to whether we say yes or no. I believe, therefore I am. The words of Kant. I believe because God has given me a knowledge and love of God made human in Jesus Christ, and through his church has revealed and reassured his teaching as the means by which we live with peace and happiness in our times, the faith that comes from the gospel.
Do you get downhearted as we seem to be becoming in the first world more secular?
No, I don't get downhearted, because St. Peter said in his first letter, chapter 3, show to the world the reason for the hope that's in you. My hope is in Jesus Christ, and I never let go of that, no matter what may happen, no matter if I may be sick, or no matter if things may go wrong, or no matter if I may be attacked, whether in the media or elsewhere. That faith is faith in Jesus, and that is unshakable.
So, constant in faith is what has rolled with you for, I think, all of your priestly days.
And I think that's why I chose that motto.
Constant in faith. It's a beautiful phrase.
Well, faith, of course, comes from God, and it's the ability for me to say, I believe. Because once I say I believe, I trust in God that he will give me the means to express that faith, the means to hold that faith in my heart, and the means to live it joyfully and with hope. And that's the promise. That's the promise. If we entrust ourselves to God, God is always faithful. God will never desert us. He'll never leave us aside. What a wonderful promise. How lucky we are.
Do you love being Archbishop of Melbourne?
I've loved everything I've been asked to do. I wondered as a young student whether I could go to the seminary. But notice, I came from a Jesuit parish. I went to a Jesuit college, and I went to a seminary where Jesuits taught us. But I didn't become a Jesuit because they, in their objective way, had helped me to see the work of the church in the normal parish. But the paradox, of course, is that I did the parish work for 1 year as a young priest and for 10 years as a parish priest in West Brunswick in St. Joseph's with wonderful people. But a whole of the rest of my life has been helping people in the marriage tribunal, helping people at the cathedral.
All those other things.
I did 50 marriages one year at the cathedral,
Goodness.
helping people in greater difficulties as Vicar General and as Auxiliary Bishop, trying to be someone who is the face of Jesus and the faith of the Church in our society. And I believe that no matter how we may be criticised for the weakness and sin and wrongdoing of human beings, the hope that we can offer to our society about family life, about goodness, about truth, about honesty, about the gospel is totally undaunted and is something which is our greatest gift to society. We shouldn't go and hide in the back room. We have to be there proclaiming and living that faith with joy, and then we'll receive a joy that we never even dreamed was possible.
Well, you certainly weren't hiding when the same-sex marriage debate happened in Australia last year. You were very forthright in very fair views. How do you look back now on the result there, which went against probably the way we
I
would look?
believe, and the Catholic Church proposes, that marriage is between a man and a woman. And the purpose of marriage is the begetting and rearing of children, but also the mutual help, because some couples don't have any children. Then we do have to look realistically at other friendships and other relationships. And I have to say, I don't approve of same-sex marriage, but I respect people who make that choice, and I believe they have to be respected. I do believe that sexual intercourse outside of marriage between a man and a woman is wrong because it's contrary to God's purpose. But I have to leave people the liberty that in the way they act, they have to be respected as human beings, still loved by God, still invited to reflect about their situation, still invited to know love and compassion and friendship in their own lives.
Many, many years of priesthood and now as Bishop and Archbishop, what's one message to Australians and people around the world who'll be watching this interview?
I think the first thing is, remember Jesus Christ is real. Love him and love others. Follow him, even if it is challenging, and know that you will always have hope and never give up. Show to the world the reason for the hope that's in you. That's what Jesus gives us. That's what Mary loved. I am the servant of the Lord. Let what you have said be done to me. My soul magnifies the Lord, for he who is mighty has done great things for me. That's the way I feel, and that's the unchanged light that God has placed in my life, through no fault of my own.
Well, a wonderful experience chatting to you today, and thanks for your time.
Thank you, Shane.
I'm Bishop Eugene Hurley from the Diocese of Darwin, which takes in the whole of the Northern Territory of Australia. And I'm delighted that Shalom Ministry is now in a position to bring some of that good news to the rest of Australia and indeed to the world. Because we live in a world where the media is so influential. It dictates so much of our learning and our attitudes. And so it's so important that the good news of Jesus Christ has to be made available to all people, because it's what we each need as human beings to enliven us, to make us more loving, and indeed to bring about peace in the world. So it's this good news that the Shalom Ministry is trying to get across to Australia now. Let me invoke God's blessing upon Shalom Ministry and all who work within it and all who are the subject of its good work. May the blessed Almighty God, Father, Son and Holy Spirit descend upon the Shalom Ministry and all who work in it and all their families. May keep them at peace forever. Amen.
Shalom World, God's own channel.